Okay, so we're going to look at the factors affecting a population within an ecosystem. So this is part of the ecology part of the course. So the first thing to think about are the actual definitions that you need to know, which are written up on here. So population is the number of organisms of a particular species which is present in an ecosystem. So if you were to count, for example, the number of rabbits or the number of woodlice, that would be the population size. Whereas the community is the different species living in an ecosystem. So if you were to take all of the different populations living within an ecosystem, then that would be the community. Ecosystem itself is defined as the organisms living there and their interactions with the physical characteristics of the ecosystem, which we'll come to more later. And then finally, niche. Niche is the specific role played by an organism within an ecosystem. And every organism has its niche, which is determined by its adaptations to the environment, by the food that it eats, its interactions with the other factors, both living and non-living within the environment. So if we have a look at a population, so if we think of a graph, and we were to draw a graph, and the graph looks at time. Now, I'm not going to give a specific unit to the time because it could be days, it could be weeks, it could be months, it could be years, depending on the organism. And then we look at the y-axis. The y-axis, again, will be population size. Again, the actual number is going to be variable, but it's going to be a number. And we look at the actual graph. We'll see we start off with a relatively slow growth. We then get a rapid exponential growth, then it slows again, and then we say it levels off. In reality, if you were to look at this part of the graph, it would actually be going up and down like this, but the fluctuations would be around a midpoint. So in this area of the graph, which is over here, we've got slow growth. Now, the reason you've got a slow growth rate there is very simple. You don't have very many organisms, therefore reproduction rate is going to be low. You know, in terms of bacteria, even to begin with, it will be slow. You're getting 1 to 2 to 4 to 8, etc. In terms of other animals, if you only got one male and one female to start with, obviously you've got limited population growth. As the number of organisms increase, they can start to reproduce faster. So here we've got more rapid or exponential growth. As the number of organisms rapidly increase and the environment can cope with it. And then growth starts to slow down again. And then you reach this sort of end point, so to speak, where growth population size is constant. In other words, the death rate is equal to the birth rate and the population is constant. Now that is called the carrying capacity. And the carrying capacity is determined by a number of different factors, but the carrying capacity is mainly determined by factors that we can split into two parts, which are what we call our abiotic and our biotic factors. And that's what we're going to concentrate on looking at now. So these terms are terms that you may have come across at GCSE, and they haven't really changed dramatically. So if we start by looking at our abiotic, our abiotic factors are non-living factors within the environment that will affect our organisms. Now, that will be different depending on the organisms that you're talking about. So it depends whether you're talking about plants or animals, depends whether you're talking about terrestrial or aquatic. So it's really important that you think about the environment that you're describing and what factors may affect that environment. So let's start by thinking about factors that affect plants and factors that affect animals. So if we start with our factors that affect plants, we've got sort of some fairly obvious ones. So you've got carbon dioxide concentration. That's obviously going to affect the rate of photosynthesis. You've got light. Now, really important, we mustn't just write light. That's far too vague. So you can talk about light intensity, because we know that the rate of photosynthesis varies depending on the light intensity. You could talk about wavelength, because we know that plants cannot generally photosynthesize with green wavelength of light, because the chlorophyll will reflect the green wavelength. You could even talk about duration, and that is how long the light lasts for in a 24-hour period, because there are some plants that respond to longer days and other plants that respond to shorter days due to other factors such as phytochromes, which are pigments within a plant that help them to respond to light. But the crucial thing is that whenever you write light, you've got to follow it with one of those three things. Now, I wouldn't separately put light intensity and light wavelength if I was asked to name two factors. You might get away with it, more often you won't. Normally choose one factor with light, but choose which one you're going to do. The most common one is intensity, but you could choose one of the other two if you want. You've also got the pH. Now that could be pH of the soil if you're talking about a terrestrial, a land-living plant. It could be pH of the water if you are talking about an aquatic plant. Minerals or ions. Okay, what you don't want to use is the word nutrients. Again, that would be in the soil or in the water. Okay, mineral ions obviously really important for plants to be able to make things like proteins. They need to be able to make magnesium, and for that you're going to need mineral ions as well. So you need nitrates to make proteins, you need phosphorus to make magnesium, plus all of the other mineral ions present within the soil as well. Now, the next one I'm going to put as water availability, but I'm going to say that you can only use that, obviously, in a terrestrial plant. You cannot use that when you're talking about an aquatic plant. They have plenty of water available. That is not going to be a problem. You can think about the humidity of the air, because humidity we know affects transpiration, and transpiration will affect the movement of water, and the water is needed for photosynthesis, so they are all linked together. We could have wind, again more likely to affect a terrestrial plant than an aquatic plant, as obviously is the humidity of the air as well. These are all terrestrial. Okay, so really look at what you're talking about, think about it. Now, some of you might think oxygen concentration, not really going to dramatically affect a plant. Okay, these are the main ones that you're going to be looking at. There are, of course, others, and the last main one to think about is obviously temperature. And that will be of both the, it could be the air, it could be the soil, it could be the water. Temperature, if you remember, affects enzymes. Enzymes are obviously important in reactions like respiration, so therefore will affect the metabolic reactions of the plant. You'll notice I've separated temperature, wind, water availability. I've not just put climate as one thing, because although I may get a mark if I'm lucky, I've stopped myself naming other things. If I'm asked to name three factors, temperature, wind, rainfall or water availability would be three separate things. I'd be daft to put them all as one. Okay, if we go to our plant, back to our animals. So the first one I would say there would be oxygen concentration. Okay, obviously animals need oxygen for aerobic respiration. again, is going to be water availability. Again, that's going to be only terrestrial animals. Animals that live in water, like fish, don't have a problem with water availability. Temperature. If you're dealing with aquatic animals, you can have pH of the water, because that is going to have a dramatic effect on their survival. You could have humidity of the air, because humidity will again affect the ability for water to evaporate. It will therefore affect the ability of the animal to stay warm or to cool down, depending on the air temperature. Wind may affect an animal. More often than not, it doesn't. Light, I wouldn't put that as one of my choices. Obviously, they do need access to shade, but I would stick to one of the main ones if I was talking about abiotic factors. Now, in terms of biotic factors, biotic factors are living factors. That's really important. So there are certain ones that are obvious. So the first one, which everyone always thinks of, is competition, because it's one that you discuss at GCSE. But at A level, we need to take it one step further. You need to describe whether the competition is interspecific, which means between species, or whether it's intraspecific, which means within a species. So if I've got a rabbit competing with a hare, that's interspecific. If I've got two rabbits competing with each other, it's intraspecific. And the other thing you must always say in a question is, what are they competing for? So crucial things are to name whether it's inter or intraspecific and say what they're competing for. So for example, my rabbits are exhibiting intraspecific competition for food. Or my robin and my magpie are exhibiting interspecific competition for food, whatever it happens to be. So what other things have we got? Well, the other obvious one is mates. That's obviously going to be the ability to compete, to have mates with each other, to be able to mate with each other. That's going to show some competition. You're going to have disease. That's going to affect organisms. You've got predation, i.e. whether they're going to be eaten, and you've got the availability of food. Okay, so that is a biotic factor, because they're going to be eating plants, other plants or animals. Okay, so when you're looking at an exam question, the main thing to think about, first of all, is, are you being asked about biotic or abiotic? If that's the case, are they plants or animals? Are those plants or animals terrestrial or aquatic? And then think of the factors that you can describe. If you're describing a biotic factor and you're describing competition, think about what they're competing for. Are they competing for water, for food, for mates? Is it interspecific or intraspecific? Things with these questions is the actual topic is not difficult. The questions are much harder. You need to read the questions really carefully, underline the crucial parts of the question to work out what you actually need to describe as your answer. And your answer needs to be really, really specific, not vague, like you would have got away with at GCSE.